Welcome to Liner Notes. My name is David Bixler.
Holding down the bari chair at Saturday Night Live, performing with musicians like Christian McBride and teaching at Julliard, have saxophonist Ron Blake at full capacity. These time constraints left little time for him to focus on his own music, but fortunately he enlisted the help of his longtime friend, guitarist Bobby Broom, and has recently released Mistaken Identity, his first recording under his own name in 15 years. In this episode of Liner Notes, Ron talks about his journey that has taken him from the Virgin Islands to New York City and from classical saxophonist to jazz saxophonist. Today's guest is Ron Blake. Ron, welcome to Liner Notes, and we're here to talk about your new album, Mistaken Identity, which is just out. It's your first record in 15 years, I read. So first, welcome. Good to see you, man, and really thoroughly enjoyed the recording.
Thank you so much, David, first of all, for having me, and congratulations on your success. This is pretty incredible. This podcast. I've had a chance to check it out a little bit more now, and I'm like, hey, dude, you get a lot done.
Yeah, well, man, it started out, I noticed my students coming in, what are you listening to? And they tell me, they'd have their headphones on, but they didn't know anything about it. They didn't know about the music. And, part of my premise was so much of what I know about jazz history was reading the back of Blue Note records when I was in college. And so, this is a chance to interview some of the people that they're listening to and, putting some humanity, behind the cool sounds they're listening to. So,
yeah,
it's kind of a labor of love. I've met a lot of people and found out things about people that I've known for a while that I wouldn't have known without speaking to them.
Yeah,
so, yeah, it's been pretty cool. But I'm glad we could finally hook up.
Yeah, man.
And about this, and perfect timing. So let's jump in with the record. The first thing, I thoroughly enjoyed the music, and you have a combination of some of your originals, and you've invited your bandmates to write, and then you also feature some of the icons of this music on here.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I took away from listening to it was just kind of like the joy that was very evident in what you're playing. A lot of the music, that is made today perhaps is kind of angsty, and, I like that. And this was just like, cats hanging out, throwing down. I think I checked out the EPK. I think it was Nat Reeves said, this is grown-up music. And that was kind of like the vibe I got from that. I think a big part of this record and the vibe is your relationship with Bobby Broom. Great guitarist from New York, but now has been in Chicago for a while. Mm-hmm. Maybe, unpack a little bit about your relationship with him, both musically and personally, because it seemed like he was kind of a mentor when you were a student at Northwestern.
Yeah, well, I actually met Bobby after I finished undergrad at Northwestern. Just to, the timeline of that, it's over 35 years now or something like that. But I was playing alto. And my roommate at the time, a great bassist, Miles Hahn, worked with Bobby's trio and mentioned, Bobby to me. And we finally, I went to one of his gigs to check him out performing and in Chicago and sat in. And that was the beginning of what is now, been a very long and productive friendship, I'd say, most of all. So, that probably comes out pretty clearly in the music, but we definitely spent a lot of time playing together in my early years before I left Chicago. Obviously, there's connections there. He was, playing with Sonny, maybe Stanley Turrentine at the time too. I can't remember now exactly, but it was like that overlap of he was on the road all the time, and when he was in town, we played. And probably like you're saying about your podcast and how that came to be. I mean, the personal side of things, when you're in the trenches with someone and you're learning from them, you're sitting in, you go over to their place and you sit down and you're listening to music, and you take out your horn, you start playing things, you start talking about phrasing or not even talking about it, but just playing through things together and stuff like that. And it starts to get like just more of a connection, I'd say. So that's been something that, although we don't play together all the time, I think it kind of stays with you, and after I transitioned to tenor, because I was really playing alto at that point, and it took a while to, Bobby was very supportive, but again, he was playing with Sonny Rollins and Stanley Turrentine and cats like that, and I was just picking up a tenor. So he was critical, but in a good way. It was a good way to sort of
tough love.
Exactly. So it took some years before the tenor thing finally kind of settled in with him. And I'm glad it has.
I read in your biography that you have a degree in classical saxophone from Northwestern, studying with one of the big teachers in that, Fred Hemke.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so were you playing jazz all the time while you were there, also like studying classical, and through high school? Were they coexisting, or were you primarily doing classical?
That's a good question. I'll try to give you the short answer on that one. I aspired to play jazz as a kid. That's kind of where I heard the music. I started playing the saxophone. I think when I turned 10, for my 10th birthday, my father, who listened to the music a lot and really how I got exposed to it, brought me home. He traveled to New York. I was growing up in the Virgin Islands. And he brought home Cannonball's, I think it was his second to last release, if I'm not mistaken, Phoenix. Yeah. And that was my 10th birthday present, and he said, well, if you want to play saxophone, this is what good saxophone sounds like. That's really what he said.
That's some good parenting, man.
Yeah. So that's what he's That's what he said to me. But the trajectory after that, there were a lot of students. There was a big support system that sort of existed through a local music school, and she was a big advocate for getting students to the National Music Camp up at Interlaken. This started the path to what would become classical saxophone. I played in the school band. I was lucky enough to get a saxophone. I wanted to play the trumpet. True story. And because my dad listened to a lot of Miles, but that's kind of how I heard Cannonball, Early Train, it was like all a thing. But he was really into the alto saxophone, loved Lou Donaldson, a lot of different cats. Cannonball was like his man though. But so I went up to Interlaken. I'd had some people show me some things, but I'd never really had any formal training, like extensive, here, let's work on tone, let's work on technique, that sort of stuff. So that kind of started the path. And then over the course of like the next 6 years, I ended up at Northwestern studying with, I started out with Lynn Clock. And there were people at home too, band directors and stuff like that. But I mean, I would say that, I met, Dr. Hemke when he commuted from Northwestern up to the academy, the boarding school up at Interlaken Arts Academy. So I finished my last 2 years of high school there. And that's, that was the connection to Fred Hemke and his assistant, the other saxophone teacher, Jim Bishop. And they were, coming out of the French school, pretty much, that was their thing. So I was primarily a classical saxophonist that wanted to play jazz. There was not much of a jazz program at the time at Northwestern. That would come years after I left there. So, I was trying to learn how I was taught, like conservatory, training sort of stuff. I was like, just grabbing books and, transcribing a little bit, but, it wasn't until later on, I think after I got out of school that, I started to get like more hands-on information on how to learn the music, what things to focus on, getting to the piano, stuff like that. So, it was mainly a classical sort of thing, but me played lead alto for a year in the big band at the university. And then I just started going out and trying to make my way around town. And I played in pop bands, stuff like that, just, playing music and learning. But it was, I would say after I got out of school, that I really started to do the deep dive, maybe about a year or so after I got out of college. I really started to hang out more, go to jam sessions, and meeting like some of the main figures of the Chicago scene. I would say, though, that Dr. Hemke, may he rest in peace, he was instrumental in introducing me to Bunky Green when I was still in school, because he knew that, I said, I didn't call him Fred back then, but I said, we grew up in a different time. What can we say? But, he knew what my interests were, and he knew that I was going to be pursuing, musically and creatively, I was going to be pursuing playing jazz and just improvisational music. And Bunky had studied with him. So he was like, let me introduce you to someone that
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Bunky got his master's, at Northwestern. I think might have been there around the same time as Rufus Reed, maybe. I think they were all at school around the same time doing their grad work. But, Bunky was, again, another person that just, I never got to spend enough time around. But when we did, it was always very, there was a lot of information, in a short space of time. But he really sort of opened my eyes to what it meant to develop a routine around practicing and learning the music, learning tunes, learning changes, just what that was about, So those were building blocks for sure. And that, as I began to play more and more, as I said, I was out there, and that's kind of how that path eventually led to me meeting Bobby, which became, a big part of continues to be a big part of the story today,
All right, great. Bunky Green, definitely an underrated, monster. And, I just recently, well, I guess it's been a couple of years ago, do you know that record with him and Stitt, the organ trio, and the drummer is Maurice White?
Yeah.
Who is the house drummer. Man, it's some serious music, bro.
Yeah.
So, first record in 15 years. You're a busy musician in New York. Obviously, the Saturday Night Live gig is a great place to be. And you teach at Julliard, and I see on social media you have a beautiful family. You have a lot going on, a lot on your plate.
Mm-hmm.
So, first record in 15 years. So what's maybe, if I can pry there, is this something that you wanted to do sooner? It looks like, too, man, I double up on my questions. Sorry.
It's okay.
But, you did this in 2 sessions, and the first one was pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
So I guess this was kind of on your mind, and then, the wall came up for everyone, and then you were able to finish this. But maybe talk about that period. Because you're busy. You're playing with Christian McBride. You're doing all sorts of things, but maybe there's not enough time for you to put your own thing out as leader again.
Yeah, I was I had been signed to a label for a few years, and after that ended, which was 2008, then like I would say that, you know, there was a bit of a shift. You know, the first few years that I started at SNL in 2005, and that was around the same time that my second daughter was born. And I was still sort of part-time. I had just started teaching part-time at Julliard too. So I was still in the early years, I would say, traveling quite a bit and doing gigs that I had been doing, you know, in between the SNL thing. And I think the first year that I joined too, there was a strike. There was a big strike, speaking of cycles, that happened around that time. So I was still sort of active in the scene, but I would say that as things developed, I really became more local for the first time in my career. So I would say that it was a bit of a transition for me, but it also afforded me, you know, more time with family and, you know, just being involved on the day-to-day. So that was a big thing for me, I would say. But also just, I don't know, I mean, spending a lot of years on the road, you realize, I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience, but I mean, after, there's something that happens more organically, more naturally, when you're playing with the same people every night, going through the same, you know, you're traveling with your, you know, your little community, dealing with all this, the trials and tribulations of getting from point A to point B, you know, backline, missed dinner, missed flight, you know, all that stuff. And I think that energy in itself sort of keeps you in a zone where your creative things just stays really sharp and really high and super in tune. And making the transition to not having that kind of energy, not doing that kind of thing, it was a bit of a shock to the system, I think. You know, it took me a minute to sort of like find my groove. And like I said, I just didn't want to rush it. I mean, I was glad to be home, spending more time at home, and, you know, glad to be teaching. So all of those things were, you know, they were kind of a part of the equation. But I think at some point, I would say maybe early, like 2011, 12, in there. And it had been about, I don't know, maybe 5 years after my last release. And I just decided, okay, it's time to get back on this horn for real. And like I said, I feel like I continued to play. I think I had great creative output, but it was more as a sideman, continuing to do stuff with Christian and whomever, just doing a lot of different things. But just for myself, you know, and goals personally in terms of what I wanted to try to develop sound-wise and stylistically, you know, and musically from a writing standpoint, like what things do I want to, you know, to focus on. And that was the big push. And there was no real set goal or time in my mind. It just so happened that in 2018, when we went into the studio, it was like, I'm ready. And let's just go in, and hopefully, I mean, it sounds like you got the vibe of the record. I mean, it was really just I wanted to document what was going on for me at that time musically, and I felt like I had sort of put some things together in a different way, and I was really feeling just good about what I was doing with the horn, and that's what I wanted to document. So it was very uplifting for me, and then I just tried to keep everything simple. I mean, probably one of the most important things I did was bringing Bobby in and asking him to produce the record, because I had sort of served as a producer of sorts, on all my other projects before that. And I just didn't want, I wanted to show up and play the saxophone and figure out tempos and, mess around with reeds.
Of course. Yeah. I do know. Tell me about your relationship with the baritone saxophone. Had you been playing that always, or did you start playing it when you were playing at SNL, or was it part of a quartet experience at Northwestern?
Whoa, very good. It started in high school. I actually, those last 2 years of high school, I played in the jazz band at Interlochen, and it's a great band, some great musicians in that band. I sat next to a great bari player who played lead tenor in the band, by the name of James Farnsworth. And yeah, James was a great friend of mine. So James loaned me his bari sax, and I messed around with it a little bit. Like I said, 2 years. And then when I got to Northwestern, I played in a saxophone quartet for 4 years. Chamber music competitions, the whole nine. It was like that kind of vibe. Some great experiences too. So the horn was always around me. I didn't think I would play it once I got done with school, and yeah, I mean,
Yeah, little did you know.
Little did I know. I mean, these things, life is fantastic. But I think it was around, 2003, 2002, 2003, somewhere in there, I connected with Michelle Adeguicello, and I think she was doing a guest spot on the Red Hot and Riot, the tribute to Fela, and asked me to be a guest. And I met the producer, Andres Levin, who at the time was putting together a band called Yerba Buena. And that was, a bunch of bad cats on the scene. Pedrito Martinez, who's still, on the scene doing amazing things. I can't remember the original cast of characters, but again, he was like, Fela, Afrobeat meets, Lower East Side, funky bari sax. I was like, sure. So that was the beginning of my run in New York with the bari sax. Okay, it was like doing more of that kind of stuff, traveling quite a bit. And then I toured with Michelle also in a group that she had called Spirit Music Jamia. And it's like Oliver Lake was on the front line. It was like different folks in and out of the front line, but I mean, I was there pretty much through the whole run. So I played bari, tenor, and maybe soprano too, I think, which was, touring with that stuff was an adventure.
That's where my thought went.
Yeah, sure. That's the first thing.
A flight with those.
Yeah. So, but anyway, so the bari kind of, it was around. I was playing it, and then I got a call to audition for SNL, and lo and behold, as they say, and it's probably the horn. This is the first time I've recorded it in the context that I did, just as a solo voice on the record. Over the years, it's just become something that I find myself gravitating towards. It's just like I need to play the horn, and I love the sound of it. I do what I do with it. In some ways, it's helpful that I didn't listen to a lot of jazz bari per se. I think I just I listened to a lot of Fela. I listened to Tower of Power. I mean, I heard amazing bari. I've heard, and there's a lot of great bari players on the scene today. But I just kind of said, well, you know what? it'll take some time for me to grow into it and make it a part of like what I want to do. And I've had to, I think, the travel thing, it's something that I would like to play more, but I also realize that it's not the most practical double for gigs, for doing quartet gigs or something. I'm traveling with a bari and a tenor. It's probably not gonna. If I get in a car and drive up and down the East Coast, sure.
Right.
But
sure, man.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's telling on this record you have 2 originals, and one of them, Grace Ann, is on baritone.
Yeah.
Which I just want to say too, that's beautiful. One of my favorite moments of the recording is there's a place where you and that's Ruben on that.
That's
on
correct.
That cut.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're in harmony right before the like the out head, and it's just like it's beautiful.
Oh,
it's so killing. Man, I kind of geek out on moments like that. I'll probably have to edit that out, but I mean, it was no, super cool. And I think there's probably some there. Like you talk about your need to play the baritone, and like you feature yourself on one of the compositions, and something that's really kind of special on the recording, orchestrationally, with just the 2 low voices like that.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. I really appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, like I said, a lot of that stuff just happened, and that was really what I was hoping to accomplish more than anything, was to really just make a record that, just felt good, sounded good, and not much more than that. Just try to make a good sounding record. And that particular horn I had recently gotten, so it was still new to me. So it was a bit of an experiment, that recording, that part of the session was. So I was like, let me try this one and see what it's gonna do for me. And I now I play it all the time. Yeah.
Before I let you go, I want to just ask about you've been at Julliard for a while. The influence of someone like Hemke in your background as a classical saxophonist, how does that play into your teaching at Julliard? Are the kids annoyed that you're making them do Fairling studies and
I can't speak for them, but I would probably guess yes. My guess would be, I've really made it a requirement too, just because I think, and this may be too long of an answer, I'm just going to put it out there. I mean, I love teaching. It's something I've done since I was 16 years old. Ever since I finished summer music camp and I went back home after high school and I spent the summer in the Virgin Islands, I had, I would line up the saxophone kids in a room for like 45 minutes every morning, and we'd work on sound and we'd work on articulation and learn some scales and stuff like that. But I just thought it was really important to share everything that I had been exposed to in a place like Julliard, where, and just, I mean, in general, I mean, the students are so talented today and have had access to so much information. And I think you brought it up on the front end when you were talking about how this podcast came into existence. There was a human connection to a lot of the information, and probably a lot of things, like you said, you've learned from having had the opportunity to sit down with folks and go, hey, tell me about this. And then you start, the story starts to fill in a lot more. So I think with students, today, I mean, there's so much that they can get on their own and working with each other. But I think that historically, I've learned more over the years from being around older musicians on the road, on the bandstand. So I try to bring that into the experience, the experiment of teaching. But fundamentally, I think that there's some things that just, they're not this way and only this way, but there's fundamentals to great wind playing that can be taught or introduced in a way that will foster just good habits and the ability to be creative with your time in the practice room. And I try to teach those things. A lot of times I use tools that came to me through my classical background, so tone production, directing air, dynamics, articulation. Why are you practicing scales? Not just learn these scales or learn these lines, but are you getting some sort of are you starting to connect something that it may be extra musical, that makes this collection of notes feel or sound a certain way, and not just I can do, check this out, I can do this and I can do this, and if I can do this and if I can move it over here a little bit and do it over this chord, and it's cool. But like, when does it start to become music? When does it start to become something that someone that's not geeking out like you and I might be about something that someone does on an instrument, where it just translates to the listener as something that feels good or evokes some sort of emotional response for them? And I think you can kind of get to that, but I think it really starts with connecting to the instrument and how much time you spend sort of just getting certain things under your fingers that will give you the foundation to go in whatever direction you want, and that's, I don't know that that's Julliard per se. That's just what I've taught. I feel that, I want my students to be able to work, and as far as etudes, for example, here's this piece of paper. I want you to look at it, get a sense for it. I want you to put on a metronome, and I want you to try to make it sound like something that someone wants to listen to the first time you play it. And just because you might, really be into Johnny Griffin or whatever, Johnny Griffin could still sit down with a piece of music like this and make a musical statement. It might not be his music, but he understood, this is the context. Okay, cool. Let's go. We're going to do this. So I try to use the more conservatory approach to give them those, those tools, or expose them to those tools, so that over the long haul, they'll know how to practice, and hopefully they'll have, good habits that they can take and go in whatever directions they want to. So that's kind of what the teaching thing and why I sort of overlap those fundamentals of wind instrument playing. I was around, Henke was the French school, and he was at Northwestern, which was like very Chicago Symphony, Arnold Jacobs, breathing, that, so there's like a combination of things that I feel like I try to just make everyone aware of. So it's just not about notes, but also ultimately I want everyone to just have those kinds of skills so they can find their own path. I don't need like 10 saxophone players that are practicing the same stuff or working on the same things. Everyone's got their own thing that they're into and why they want to get up every day and play the horn. I just want to make sure you're not doing anything that's going to obstruct your path to getting to that when you're practicing the instrument. So that's kind of the 5-minute Ron Blake studio class. Sorry, that was
It
a long answer. I'm
No.
sorry.
That's solid. They're in good hands, definitely. Ron, a pleasure speaking with you this morning for you. The record Mistaken Identity, out and about getting reviewed. You just had looks like a great hit at Dizzy's, and I hope that there's more of those coming up in the future with this band.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
Liner Notes is grateful for the support of Van Doren Reeds and Mouthpieces. Be sure and check out the Van Doren Advisory Studio in New York City for all your sound sculpting needs. Liner Notes is grateful for the support of Arlen's Good Beer in Bowling Green, Ohio.
Engineered by Marco Mendoza. Visit his website at engineeredbymarco.com.
The theme music is No FOMO, Mofo by yours truly. Produced by David Bixler. Be sure and subscribe to Liner Notes wherever you find your podcasts. If you like what you hear, I ask that you consider supporting Liner Notes financially. You can do this by going to the Liner Notes tab at davidbixler.com. Thank you for your consideration.